Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Bonjour à tous, benvenuti. My name is Domenic Cusmano, and I am the moderator of today's event. Welcome to Poetry and Politics with Liana Cusmano. We are all in different territories at this time. I would like to acknowledge that I am located on unceded Indigenous lands. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. We acknowledge them and other nations who care for the land across our country, and we recognize them as Canada's first storytellers. Please remain muted. Feel free to type in questions using the chat function at any time during the proceedings. I will read them out during the question period at the end. And now I'd like to introduce Christopher DiRaddo. Christopher DiRaddo is the author of two novels, The Geography of Pluto, published in 2014, and The Family Way, to be published in April 2021 by Vehicle Press. He is the founder and host of the Violet Hour reading series and is the current president of the Quebec Writers Federation, QWF. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Domenic, and thank you also to Licha and to Accenti magazine for asking me to be a part of this afternoon's event. It gives me great pleasure to introduce today's special guest, Liana Cusmano, also known as Luca, or by Curious George. Liana is a writer, poet, filmmaker, and spoken word artist. They are the 2018 and 2019 Montreal Slam champion and runner-up in the 2019 Canadian Individual Poetry Slam Championship. A participant in the Banff Center's 2019 Spoken Word Residency Program, Liana has presented their work in English, French, and Italian across North America, Europe, and Asia. They wrote the short film La Femme Finale, screened at the 2015 Cannes Film Festival, and wrote and directed the award-winning Matters of Great Unimportance, which screened at the 2019 Blue Metropolis International Literary Festival. In the 2019 Canadian federal election, Liana ran for office with the Green Party of Canada. They also took part in the spoken word poetry tour I See You, alongside Poet Laureate of Edmonton, Nisha Patel, in the fall of 2019. With work that touches on heritage, queerness, relationships, and mental health, their aim is to help others feel both seen and safe. Liana is currently the president of the Green Party of Canada. Their first novel, Catch and Release, will be published by Guernica Editions. Please welcome Liana Cusmano.
Thanks very much, Chris. And thanks to everybody for being here. Doing performances on Zoom is always strange and awkward as somebody who's used to doing stuff that's live. So I'm really grateful that everybody's tuned in and that you're all here for poetry and politics. So as Chris said, some of you know me as Liana, some of you know me as Luca, some of you know me as By Curious George. If you live in Montreal, you saw my election posters up around town last October. One of my grandparents said that I look better in the posters than I do in real life, which is the kind of like direct and blunt honesty that I think is going to help me a lot in my political career. To start off, I'm going to do a poem that has absolutely nothing to do with any of that. It's called Copies. Here goes. Let's try this again. To be caught between the realization that living forever would never be enough and the conviction that one life is already too many is to be a child and a cynic in the same moment. If you have chosen to be here so many times, over and over again, it must be because you've chosen to trust every other iteration of yourself when each one decided that all of your harsh and soft could share the spaces between your bones. Could it be that your life is a quirky mistake that somebody made on purpose? Is your existence a footnote that someone put a pin in and forgot to get back to? Hold that thought. You're in the canned food aisle again looking for anything but more beans when you ask yourself, if human cells are constantly multiplying and are eventually exhausted and die, like photocopies of photocopies, does that mean that we are all fading more and more into our truest selves? If you're standing in front of the cheapest breakfast cereals because you've chosen to be here so many times, does that mean that you will die at the height of who you are? Why buy food if you're just going to eat it and then have to buy more? Why squander the fruits of your starving artist's labor on undeserving vegetables? Why fight the craving for a black hole deep enough to grind you down to nothing? Your parents and their parents before them have passed down all the ingredients you need to be someone who has a panic attack in front of the frozen yogurt. And yet you only ever buy the same brands of ketchup and peanut butter that you ate growing up. You realize that many of our relationships are just copies of the ones we had when we were younger. because even something painful can be comforting when it's familiar. And you know that the seeds of your own genealogy will have mushroomed beyond your control the next time you start sobbing for no reason on public transit alone. Last week, you cried over spilled milk in the dairy aisle because maybe the half-life of heartbreak is just one whole cliched lifetime. You're scanning the shelves for a tea that will put you to sleep when you vaguely remember what it's like to drift off in no torment, to wake up from no nightmares. The man on the phone next to you has got white toast, acne products, and fabric softener in his cart all on sale. And when you hear him say, "Don't worry, I'll come and get you," you remember how those words cooled the panic of every flat tire and every last night bus that never came. The snack foods evoke the sheer magnitude of friendships that can last all the way from the words, "Do you need to copy my math homework?" to the question, "What time is the funeral?" You see her favorite brand of sweet red chili sauce and you think of that golden evening when she looked at you in the lamplight and you realized that the two of you were in love. You can't remember the last time you were happy for no reason, only all of the moments you were sad without explanation. What if you chose to put a pin in some of those moments and just forgot to get back to them? What if you remembered that to go to the grocery store is to hold that thought, that to go to the grocery store is to have reached the height of who you are and decided not to jump? To go to the grocery store is one you sell, one you photocopy that will be better and truer than the one that came before, because you are a child and a cynic in the same moment, because your being here is a quirky mistake that you continue to repeat on purpose. You know that you can remember. You know that to go to the grocery store is to say, "Let's try this again." So that got us started. Thanks, everybody. As Chris mentioned, I've been doing a number of projects over the years. My most recent project actually is a television production with a production company called Eureka Productions about what it means to be Italian Canadian in Montreal and all the different, genre, les parcours inhabituels, all the unusual and non-traditional things that some of us have decided to do. Which is basically for some of us not be a lawyer or an engineer or you know, get a doctorate or a master's or anything like that, but decide to do really like lucrative things like poetry and politics. So the Italian epistolary expert Sonia Cancian is a part of that project, and I'm just really really excited and really grateful to be doing a number of really cool things. I know that it's a privilege, especially at this point in this economy and in this world and in this current planetary health crisis, to be able to do art and to share it. And I think it's also really important that we come together however we can and connect at times when some of us are really isolated and really, really worried about everything. Someone who's familiar with like my poetry repertoire asked me why I never write any happy poems. And I was like, "What are you talking about? My poems are happy." And that person was like, "Babe, nah, not really." So this is one of the only happy poems I've ever written. It is based exclusively in something happy that happened. I have performed it at slams and it has like scored very, very poorly because happy poems score very poorly, but I'm going to do it here for you anyway because nobody's keeping score as far as I am aware. So this is called Lights. To wander aimlessly at night alone in the wintertime is to look for something that is easier to see when there isn't any light. Some problems are best solved in the dark, in the razor-sharp feedback loops of my own frozen thoughts. But when I come home to her and cup my whole body around hers, I remember that this slow burn will steam every harsh season from my skin. Our lamp watches from the bedside table as I fold myself against her, every shining strand of her hair a metaphor in words I haven't found yet. That screaming fire, the one that fills every closet, feels like an almost other life. I wish I could tell my teenage self, heartbroken, eyes fixed on the changing room floor, that someday their lover would be a star they could stare at with impunity. A lightning strike half asleep in an old t-shirt, a firelight spooned against their chest. Some things are easier to see in the dark. I trail sparks over her skin. I reach over and turn off the light. It's also one of the shortest ones. I find that some poets and some politicians tend to just go on and on and on. So when you have a time limit or a word limit, it's helpful to get all the things that you want to say out in a way that's clear and engaging. I'm of Italian Canadian heritage, and my grandparents have had such an important, a huge impact on me and continue to be a really, really important force in my life. I don't know who can relate to this, but I think that grandmothers and people who are really, really, when cooking and baking is really important to them, there's usually their kitchen is like an isolated place in the universe where like normal rules and logic don't apply. So like, just as an example, like the cup is a standard measurement. In my grandmother's kitchen basement, which is an isolated place in the universe where none of the normal rules apply, she uses one cup. It's the one blue cup, and that is her standard measurement for those purposes. I see Monica Meneghetti putting a thumbs up. Thanks, Monica. And I think all of us can probably relate to family being just beautiful and intense and messy. And there will always be differences of opinion, especially with the members of our families who are a little bit older. And I think that to negotiate those differences of opinion and to discuss, to say things like mixed proportional representation is important because if we had it when you had emigrated, there wouldn't have been any signs lying around saying no Italians need apply. So I think those discussions are difficult, and it's because they're difficult that they're such a huge act of love. So with that in mind, here's a poem called Hair. To cut my hair short would be to violate the rules of a standard that asks me not to exist. To cut my hair short would be to see myself in another person at the club on a Saturday night or at the corner on the street, where our eye contact is a double-sided mirror, where our recognition is based on the stereotype that allows us to be seen by giving us away. To cut my hair short would be an act of self-sabotage in the twisted game I play with my extended family every week at Sunday lunch. The game is called Let's Pretend That I'm a Woman because being non-binary isn't a thing. I've always known the rules because I've been punished for breaking them for as long as I can remember. In this dining room, my value as a person is predicated on my value as a woman. My performance is scored by the people I've known my whole life. The oldest judges are the most difficult ones to impress. Here, to be woman is to be the punchline in a joke that was never funny. To be woman is to burst into flames inside a bell jar. To be woman is to have long hair. My extended family doesn't understand that my gender is not defined by what I choose to do or not do to my body, that who I am cannot be broken down into what they can or cannot see, that I am a both neither boy girl with long hair who wears a menstrual cup. I'm under no obligation to explain my identity to those who would invalidate it, to those who manage to hurt me so deeply even though they love me so much. But it's easier to refuse to answer questions if those questions are never asked. And so I do not wear my boxers, I do not wear my binder, I do not ask that people use my pronouns at Sunday lunch. Points are docked from my final score if I ask that people use my pronouns. The glance I share with the person in the club, on the street, has a mangled cousin in the glance I exchange with my uncle. His disdain is a knife wound in a heart that's still unlearning the ingrained concept of love as something that I have to earn. My aunt's strike against the transsexuals is a hammer blow to my ribcage. My grandmother's crack about the gays is a slap in my face. I realize that the only gaze my grandfather will ever accept is the one my cousin levels against me when I show up to lunch wearing my brother's tie. It's easier for everyone to see me for who I claim to be if I can package myself as a stereotype that they can recognize. How can I be a boy if I don't look like one? How can I be non-binary if I'm not androgynous? How do I maintain and protect my soul when it's in a so-called biologically binary body that is woman in all the parts that matter and man only in what I choose to add or take away? How can I make sure that I'm not performing my authentic self at the club on a Saturday night, at the corner on the street, at every Sunday lunch? How do I decide whether or not I want to play this game anymore and what the consequences might be if I choose to quit? At the most recent Sunday lunch, I tell everyone that I've made a hairdresser's appointment. I look around the room and remember that these judges are human, that they can be understood and held accountable and compassionately educated all at the same time. I realize that I cannot be seen on their terms without becoming invisible to myself. I realize that this was never a game that I could win or lose. I make my decision. I forfeit. My grandmother is the culinary master and matriarch of our entire family. And recently one of the men in my family made, I don't know if it was a lasagna or a dessert or something, And I asked her, you know, and she had tried some, and I'd asked her what she thought of it. And I said, what did you think of what so-and-so made? You know, I thought it was good. And she just said, well, you know, it was fine. But he's not a chef, he's just a man. Which I thought was like scathing and brutal and has a ton of like gender implications that I don't really have time to get into right now. If I had a 2-hour-long Zoom webinar, and if I had my grandmother's contributions as well, I don't think that we would get to the bottom of everything that's entailed in a statement like that. But that's going to be my jumping off point for a poem in Italian that I'm going to do. It's called Quicksand Sugar Bowl. The translation is by Elettra Bedon. In Italian, it's called La zuccheriera delle sabbie mobili. Here we go. Stamattina ho scelto di sparire nelle sabbie mobili della zuccheriera. Il cactus ci sorride scioccamente dal davanzale e tu ti nascondi dietro i tuoi occhiali cerchiati di corno e il tuo orgoglio, il cuore spalancato. Chiedo se devo riempire di nuovo la caffetteria con quella disgustosa, scura polvere artificiale che hai comprato nel negozio di prodotti biologici in fondo alla strada, ma tu dici no, lo farai tu. Sembra ti piace l'odore della segatura appena macinata come prima cosa al mattino. Una cosa che non hai mai capito è che il cibo freddo è del tutto senza valore. Così se stai per chiedermi di prepararti qualche fetta di pane di quinoa tostato mentre le mie cialde si stanno raffreddando, tanto vale mettere nel cactus. Uno di noi due è stato insolitamente pungente la settimana scorsa e le tue parole sono una risposta sgradevole e insufficiente. Sì, tu desideri amore raffinato e sentimentale, tutta quella spazzatura. Io non ho voglia di stare a sentire tutta la tua schifezza femminista. Sembra che io sia diffidente ed emotivamente non disponibile, ma sei tu che non capisci. Mi sto affogando in sabbie mobili che non posso controllare. Si alza il vapore, si alzano le voci, la zuccheriera si infrange sul pavimento. Thank you. As Chris mentioned, my first novel, Catch and Release, is going to be published by Guernica Editions in however long it takes between when you sign the publishing contract and when it's actually on the shelves. I'm not sure how long that is. I assume it's a little bit different for everybody. But last year I ran in a federal election, and then I decided that I would go on a spoken word poetry tour, and then I decided that I would finish a 60,000 word novel, and then I decided that I would be the president of a federal party. The moral of the story is that learning how to relax is really important. And if ever you decide to pursue poetry and politics against the better judgment of yourself and everybody else in your life, you can call me and we can discuss and talk about how it's wonderful and difficult all at the same time. So I'm going to be reading an excerpt from my novel. It's about this young woman who comes out as bisexual in her early 20s and is diagnosed with major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder, and starts to explore everything that has brought her to where she is. And part of that exploration, and it's a non-linear and recursive narrative because, you know, why not? Let's make this as difficult as we possibly can. She explores, in hindsight, a relationship with a teacher that she had in high school that she realizes was probably extremely inappropriate. So this is the first time that I'm going to be reading an excerpt of this novel for anybody. So in this chapter, the protagonist is 14. She's in high school. She's just finished a soccer game with her high school soccer team. She's waiting for a bus at a bus stop in the rain, and her high school English teacher shows up. I looked up at the street, squinting through the rain. The boulevard slanted a little towards the sidewalk so that water collected at the edge of the pavement before it drained into the gutter, and any car that passed by sent a long puddle cascading onto the sidewalk. A car had caught my eye because instead of speeding past and showering me, it had slowed and finally stopped. Angela Damon lowered the passenger side window and smiled at me. "Did you guys win?" she asked. I grinned and made my way out of the bus shelter into the street. There was no traffic, so nobody honked at us as I bent over the windowsill of the blue hatchback and talked to her in the rain. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Of course you did. Did you score?" I blushed, wishing I could think of something else to say. "Yeah, of course you did." She was smiling at me. I remembered that she'd had a staff meeting this afternoon, announced on the intercom during homeroom. She'd probably just left the school. Sitting in her car, hand still on the wheel, she had a beige raincoat on, her classy black handbag and blue umbrella in the back seat. I'd seen her with her hair down in that day in class, but now her thick curls were done up in a bun that brought out her sharp cheekbones and heart-shaped face. She was beautiful. "Are you getting in?" she asked. I blinked without saying anything. "Are you getting in?" I shuffled uncomfortably as the raindrops assaulted me. I could feel them on my head and shoulders. My cleats were full of water. Angela Damon pressed me, but not unkindly. "Couldn't anyone on the team give you a lift?" I didn't ask. "Why not?" I shrugged. I didn't want to impose. "Couldn't your parents come pick you up?" "Of course, but you know, they're tired. They've been working all day." I figured I would just take the bus. You didn't want to impose. She was making fun of me. Her smile was mocking, but her eyes were kind. "Right," I stammered. "Just like right now, you know, I don't want to impose." She sighed. "Get in, sweetheart." "What?" Her voice was gentle, as if she were telling a child not to be scared. Get in, out of the rain. Seeing my hesitation, she reached over and unlocked the passenger door. Shivering, my breath quaking in my lungs, I opened the door and got in. Her car was warm and dry. I put my soccer bag at my feet, careful not to track too much mud on the floor mat. "Thank you," I said. "I'm sorry, I'm getting the seat wet." Rainwater dripped into my eyes. I blinked again, and when my vision cleared, I saw Angela Damon looking at me. "It's fine," she said. "You're allowed to ask for help when you need it." I know. I wasn't cold anymore, but somehow I was still shaking. I had a strange feeling in the pit of my stomach, a breathless, anticipatory tightness, as though I were about to shoot and score a goal. "No, you don't." She was smiling. "Are you cold, love?" And then she put her hand on my cheek. Even after all this time, I still remember the moment Angela Damon touched my face when we were both sitting in her car, idling on the side of that street that rainy afternoon in late September when I was 14. It was as if time had slowed down and then collapsed into that one moment, and it was the most alive I had felt in a long time. The whole car was filled with her scent, sweet and heavy and comforting. She looked into my eyes and cupped my left cheek with her right hand while the raindrops drummed on the windshield. I can still hear her voice. "Are you cold, love?" She turned up the heat and put the car in gear. As we pulled away from the bus shelter, she began to tell me about her day and how the staff meeting had gone. Even though she was the one behind the wheel driving me home, doing me a favor, she spoke to me as if we were old friends, with comfort and ease. I had never seen her so relaxed. "I can't wait to get home and take a long hot shower," she sighed, turning left at a flashing green light. "It's been a long day." "It has," I agreed, as though we had experienced it together, as if the closeness I had always imagined between us had somehow become a reality. I took my eyes off the road to glance at her frowning intently through the windshield. All of her gestures were nearly fascinating to me, unfolding inside this car in a way I had never seen before as we chatted. Turning on the windshield wipers, checking her blind spot, pushing a strand of hair from her face. It felt like our relationship, confined until now to the classroom, was morphing and blossoming into something new and exciting, something more intimate, more liberated. I thought of how stifling it would feel to go back to my desk in her English class, watching her from the same vantage point as everybody else. I stole a nervous glance at her. She caught my eye and smiled. Taking her right hand off the steering wheel, she placed it on my left knee, on the bare skin between the edge of my shorts and the top of my sock. Angela Damon squeezed my knee once, twice, and drove the rest of the way to my house one-handed. When she parked the car in front of my parents' bungalow and pulled her hand away, it felt like she was abruptly taking back a gift she had promised me I could keep. She hugged me before I got out of her car, even though I was all wet. Throughout the ride, I hadn't told her about those strange feelings of being sad and tired and bored, about half-heartedly thinking things like, "Nah, I can't kill myself today, I have a debate tournament this weekend," or about waking up in the morning and thinking, "Why am I still here?" I didn't tell her any of that. I thanked her and waved, smiling, as she pulled away in her little blue hatchback. And I wasn't surprised when the next day, Saturday, she sent me an email and asked me how I was feeling. So this novel will be published by Guernica Editions. And it took a long time to write. It took several years to write. I started writing it when I was on exchange in Australia on the other side of the world, because I think I needed to get as far away as possible from where some of those things had happened to be able to write them. And I think that that's common for writers and poets and artists who need to process information. It takes time and space and a certain amount of focus. And it's obviously different for everybody. Chris, how are we doing for time?
I think, according to the schedule here, I think there's still another correct me if I'm wrong, Domenic, 10 minutes or so?
Thank you for deferring to me, Chris. Yes, we have about between 5 and 10 minutes to go. And then
Perfect.
we'll open it up to questions. So meanwhile, I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions, there's a chat function at the bottom, usually at the bottom of the screen. And you can click on that, a little sidebar opens, and you can type in your questions there. So thank you. Go ahead, Liana.
Thanks very much. So over the years, I've worked a lot of different kinds of jobs, and a lot of those jobs involved kids. So I've given poetry workshops and been an arts educator and worked with kids in learning centers. And kids are like grandparents. They have like this, they have no filter, and they'll tell you exactly what it is that they think. And sometimes they will keep things from you that are actually pretty important that they probably should have told you a while ago. But there was this kid I was working with at a learning center, and she was in the 2nd grade, and she was having trouble with her vowels. She was not having it with these vowels. And she like sighed and threw up her hands as if these vowels had all like personally and single-handedly decided to ruin her life on purpose, and said that, you know, why does everything have to be so complicated? And this other kid who was maybe 8 said, without skipping a beat, totally deadpan, because we have to pay taxes, Sarah. Like, all of the difficult things in our lives are to prepare us for when we have to pay taxes. And this was the same kid who, when another little girl asked me, like straight up, because I was presenting pretty androgynously, she said, "Are you a boy or a girl?" Just like out of the blue, like nowhere, just hit me with your question, like when I've walked in at like 5 p.m. And the same kid jumped in and said, "That's really rude, and that's none of your business." And so I always remember that 8-year-old kid, Richard from Selwyn House, who like has consistently had my back when it comes to kids and all the questions they ask. So this poem is called The Good Kid. The good kid is the kid whose parents never needed to go to parent-teacher night, but who always went anyway. The kid who aced the test that everybody else failed and who still mourned that bonus question. The good kid has never broken a rule, told a lie, fallen short, or fallen down. When the good kid was born, her father was grateful that from that moment forward, he would always have a purpose. When the good kid was born, her mother was relieved that from that day on, she would never be alone. The good kid is the middle ground on which her immigrant parents battled for ideals she doesn't understand: faith, finance, fidelity. The good kid is potty trained by age 2, can read by age 4. The good kid knows how to keep quiet, how to do what she's told, how to be nice, how to hold it until they get home. The good kid knows that she should comfort her mother when her parents fight. The good kid knows that she should not disturb her father when he comes home from work. To keep other people from hurting, the good kid tumbles and says it doesn't hurt. To keep other people from crying, the good kid never cries. The good kid is taught to come first for everyone except herself. Her family has done everything. Her family has given so much. Her family has crossed space and time to give her all the things she never asked for, that she was never entitled to. The least she can do is her best. And the surest way to know that she has done her best is to make sure that she is the best on every report card, every scoreboard, every honor roll. The good kid is a machine that runs on well done, that's amazing, congratulations. To make a mistake, to fail, is to be tossed on the junk heap of, are you mad at me? What did I do wrong? Do you still love me? The good kid is a status symbol in the battered individual's ascent from second-rate immigrant to first-class citizen, an accomplishment that her grandparents will flaunt to impress the people they left behind 50 years ago in another world. The good kid does not doubt their love. She does not confuse it with ownership. She will learn that it comes from a place that's pure and proud and tender. She will also learn that there's a difference between love that is unconditional and love that is indiscriminate, and that difference is the fine line between I love you because you are you and I love you because you are mine. When presented with 2 pairs of eyeglasses, 3 flavors of ice cream, 4 Friday night movie options, the good kid asks, which one is the best? The question, what do you want, does not compute. The good kid's family asks her what she will be when she grows up, and she gives them the answer she thinks they want to hear. She does not tell them when she is hungry or tired or sad or lonely, because she was never taught that that actually mattered. The good kid thought about writing this poem and then decided that it was too whiny and ungrateful. The good kid stumbles and says, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. The good kid is assigned a writing exercise at school. The prompt is, when do you feel sad? And what are you afraid of? The good kid treats the exercise like an optimization test. She writes, I'm only sad when other people are sad. I am not afraid of anything. Thank you. One of the last pieces that I'm going to do is another short one. I think that to have, and this is true for poetry as much as it is for politics, to have a platform or a voice or any level of visibility or exposure is a privilege and a responsibility that I think we need to take very seriously. And I think that that level of seriousness is very easily complemented by like the small bits of humor that you can find in your everyday life. So I was thinking about the next federal election and whether I might decide to run and where I might decide to run. And I was looking at like the different like hipster neighborhoods in Montreal that might be good electoral, politically sound decisions to run in. And somebody made a really, there are a lot of like scathing and really blunt and direct people in my life who will say, well, I think you shouldn't run in this one because this is like the what's it called? The really like sophisticated, like nouveau riche kind of hipster neighborhood, and you shouldn't run there. You should run in like the dirty, grungy, like scrappy spoken word hipster neighborhood. And I was like, look, if you want to be my campaign manager, it sounds like you have a really good grasp of what's what. So we should definitely stay in touch. This piece is called Did You Know? Did you know that the reasons for your being here in my office as a patient right now were never your fault? That there is no concrete reason for you to doubt your own steel or strength or spine, even when everyone tells you otherwise? Did you know that it's not your fault that sometimes people will say the words, I love you, and not mean it? The way you talk about yourself reminds me of sports coaches who believe that provoking and abusing their players is a sustainable way to make sure they perform. You cannot expect to outrun a panic attack and then punish yourself when you fail. You cannot hope to outmaneuver the depression that is settled like lead in your bones, ready to be triggered again and again and again, every time you look in the mirror and it feels like the opposite of recognizing a stranger. Did you think that your coming here and asking for help is a weakness? That walking me through the strangled hellfire of your own thoughts or taking what I prescribe you is a stain on your character? You do not have to make this any harder for yourself than it already is. You exist in a world that consistently, pervasively demands that you not exist. But the fact that you're here right now, in spite of everything, probably means that the weight of your own bones has not yet ground you down to nothing. It probably means that instead of bursting against your rib cage, your lungs will eventually release everything that has been forced on you and your body since some doctor in some delivery room first shackled you to a whole society's expectation. You don't have to hang on to all that if you don't want to. You don't have to hang on to any of that. Toute ta cathédrale engloutie, tes synapses incomplètes, les secrets, les défenses, tes douleurs invisibles. Tu n'as aucunement besoin de dissimuler ton âme massacrée. Did you know that it's not impossible for men to cry, even though you've never seen your father do it? Did you know that you have come up against all the darkest and most broken parts of yourself and powered through every single time? Did you know that probably everything is going to be all right? Did you know that sometimes people will say the words, I love you, and mean it?
Okay, I'm going to intervene. Liana, if you would like, we can stop here. If not, maybe do you have a short piece you'd like to end with?
I think that was it.
Okay, great. So now I'd like to invite Chris, perhaps, to take the floor once again and maybe kick off with the first question. Go ahead, Chris.
Sure. Thanks, Domenic, and thank you, Liana, for sharing your work with us. You're writing about a lot of things and issues we don't hear a lot about in the Italian writing community, so I thank you for being so open and honest with your work. One of the first pieces you read, you were talking about these living judges and kind of your family and the Italian family. And you're writing from a place of multiple intersections here, of being a queer person and also Italian Canadian. Can you talk about like maybe how these identities kind of intersect within you? You know, are they harmonious? Do you find them at conflict? Is your writing a way to kind of like address kind of this nature of identities within you?
I think to answer that last part, writing is definitely a way to process and to address all of these different parts that are intersecting and operating at the same time. One thing that I've noticed is that language is obviously key here, because it's the language that I went to university in, because it's the language that I use in spoken word circles and artist circles. English is the language where I feel most comfortable discussing all of these intersections. My queer Italian vocabulary is basically non-existent, because to discuss queerness in Italian, or with people of Italian heritage, or with people who only speak Italian like my grandparents, would be very, very difficult. So I only just learned recently that there are gender neutral pronouns in Italian, and they're lu, and instead of attaching a or o to the end of a gendered word in Italian, you add u in Italian. A gendered word, you add u in Italian, you add e in Spanish. So there are all of these different customs and different transformations happening in different languages. But because I use English and French most often, and I have used those traditionally to discuss queerness, even if I wanted to explain, and if I was able to explain gender identity and sexual orientation to my grandparents, let's say, or members of that generation or that part of the community, it would be very difficult. I would have to look for the words. So those intersections are things that I explore on my own, and with my community and with other young people of Italian Canadian heritage. And it's always a good feeling to be able to connect with others, and even if they're not Italian, to be able to connect on this shaky ground that seems to be constantly shifting beneath all our feet, which is, who am I and where do I come from, and how do I negotiate that, and how do I keep that from becoming a wedge between me and some of the people that I care about who don't quite understand.
It's clear to me like how the personal and the political really affect your work, and I'm kind of curious to know if your poetry, or kind of like the affects your politics, because like you're very much kind of like you almost like you have these multiple careers here, a career as an artist, but also a career as a politician. And I'm curious, like, does poetry influence your work as someone who's the president of the Green Party?
It's interesting that you say that, because I think one issue that I've run into in politics and working on campaigns is this issue of feelings, which are these things that all of us as people have, and which can be extremely, extremely inconvenient, especially in politics. So I found myself having to switch between like, okay, I'm going to chair this meeting, and for the purpose of this meeting, I have no emotions, none whatsoever, because they don't matter and they're not relevant here. So in that sense, the emotions that you have to find, that you go to for your political drive or for your poetic inclinations, sometimes need to be suspended, I think, when you're in a debate, or when you're discussing, policy or the future of the party, or whatever it might be. But I think poetry informs my politics because I started doing poetry in the spoken word community. And spoken word is one of the most accessible art forms. And there are a lot of people who come to that art form and who explore it from the margins. And I think that that's where where I sort of became a little bit more politically engaged and politically aware, which is using this art form as a platform for exploring issues that are important and connecting with other people who are queer or trans or non-binary, or who otherwise find themselves a little bit at odds. And so to have that origin point, and then to jump from there to politics, which is like, let's stop writing about being queer and sad. Let's like maybe do something about other people who are like even queerer and even sadder. That would be a good idea. So that was the transition that I tried to make, and that I have been trying to make. But I think, so poetry and politics definitely intersect, but there are some things that, it's a Venn diagram. And there are some things involved in politics that you'll never see in poetry, and some things in poetry that you'll never see in politics. So like if I'm working on a campaign and, somebody is having a hard time and they have this grievance or this difficulty, I'm the person that they will come and talk to about it, because I know what it's like to feel like your feelings are the most important thing in the room, and they are the biggest thing in the room, and they require all your attention. And in politics, you just can't operate like that. It's just not going to work. It's extremely impractical and selfish, and not going to advance your goals at all. So if I'm working on something and there's, and I meet someone who's like that, the two of us will definitely connect on that score, and then go from there. Like, how are we going to take our feelings and put them in this little box for now, and sort of do what needs to be done?
Thank you. I have more questions, but Domenic, do you want to see if there's anyone who wants to, do we get any questions from the participants?
Yes, in fact, we have quite a few questions, which I would be happy to read. And Chris, maybe we can come back to your questions a little bit later on, a little further on. So the first question is from Darlene Madot. And Darlene says, as writers, we're used to making friends and family uncomfortable with our writing. How uncomfortable as a writer and as parents does Liana's writing make you and Licia feel? I think this is a question for the parents. Maybe we'll defer to Liana. So Liana, how do you think your parents are negotiating how they feel about being uncomfortable about
I have never experienced something so meta, and to have this happen on a Zoom call where like some of my political colleagues are on, some of my poetic colleagues are on, that my parents are on. This is going to be a discussion that we're going to have. This is something we're going to refer back to, I think, for a long time. I think that, you know, because my parents are writers and because they also write, and I think that all of us have been guilty of reading one another's writing and trying to parse which parts of it are true and which characters are based on real people and which events actually happened. And we don't really like it when people do it to our writing, because, you know, we know that some of the stuff we write about is totally made up and it's not actually based on any given one person. But then when it's our turn, we do it to other people. So I think that those discussions, you know, need to be had. I think that when you're writing about family, when your family are writers, and when, you know, you're all family writers talking about one another's writing about family, it becomes a very, very tricky thing to navigate, because again, there are so many feelings involved. I don't know how my parents are negotiating, you know, my writing and their feelings about it. I'm sure this is something we'll discuss at some point, but if there's one thing that has always been important to me, is to try to, because these topics are so complex and they can be difficult and they can be really emotional. One thing that I always try to remember, and that I want everyone in my family and everybody who's close to me to remember, is that to express these things and to be willing to discuss them and negotiate them, I think is an act of love and courage that all of us can engage in. Because of course, nobody likes to talk about feelings that make them uncomfortable. Nobody likes to see other people be sad or unhappy. And I think the only thing that you could do that's worse than having someone see you be vulnerable, as difficult and as, you know, undesirable as that might be, one thing that's worse is knowing that there's an opportunity for someone to be there for you when you're vulnerable and depriving them of that opportunity and having them find out about it afterwards. I think that difficult discussions are often the ones that will be the most valuable and the most memorable going forward.
Well, thank you for that. And now a question from Carmelo Militano. Carmelo writes, your poetry is full of wonderful musical long sentences and a piling on of images, feelings, and moods. I wonder what your first drafts look like. How do you go about accumulating all those images, feelings, and thoughts?
That's a good question. A lot of my poems just start off as random lines written in different notebooks. And then I'll sit down and put all the notebooks together and sort of craft something and pull from those different lines that I've written down in isolation. And sometimes they're just totally random. And they're usually layered with something from childhood or from the past. So there's this whole poem that I now want to build around this one feeling that I had. And it was when I ate this particular piece of cheese, and I can't remember what it was, but it tasted like that feeling that you get when you're a child and you've jumped into the swimming pool and all the chlorine is like up your nose and at the back of your throat. And it was a feeling that I felt so intensely and so viscerally. And I was like, this is so random. But I'm going to try to put it in a poem if I can, because I think that would be fun. So really it's just an accumulation of just observations. Some of them happen very, very quickly. like I had this piece of cheese and here's how I feel. And some of them are built very consciously and intentionally over time.
Okay. And now a question from Gabrielle Nicoli. Hi, Liana, thanks for such profound and thought-provoking reads from your accounts regarding your nonna, but also from the documentary of queer and Italian Canadians, pardon me. I'm wondering what conscious degree of gendering of language affects your very active writing. I think you call it code switching, and I imagine it as being peculiar in both its conflictual and liberating force. Or specular in both its conflictual and liberating force.
So the question is how I negotiate that gendering?
Well, I guess I'm wondering what conscious degree of gendering of language affects your very active writing.
Okay. That conscious gendering, how it affects my writing, a lot, definitely. And I think it's writing in English, it's easier to write, maybe ironically enough, it's easier to write about gender in a language that is not as gendered. And so when I find myself writing in French or writing in Italian or speaking in those two languages, to know that so many words are gendered and to know that the suffixes of those words, I will have to be intentional about them. And I will have to decide, am I going to let this go? Am I going to insist on this? How do I feel on this particular day? When I myself am writing about gender, it's very, very conscious. But there's this space that I think all artists have to get to between experiencing something and having processed it properly, and in the middle is writing about it. And so that space is very, very emotional. And I think that that's why a lot of writers, will do their best work at 2 or 3 in the morning when it's dark and there's nobody around and nobody's going to ask you any questions. And you can just be all in your feelings at your computer or with your notebook to really think about, that conscious gendering and how you're going to negotiate it as a person and as you write. I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, Gabrielle can always come back with a follow-up question. Chris, can I pass it on to you for the next question?
Sure. I am very curious too. I mean, I think a lot of us do know your parents, of course, Licia and Domenic. And I'm curious, as a writer growing up in that household, what were you surrounded by? Like, what were your influences, and how did you decide how did you know that you wanted to be a writer? I'd be very curious to know what it was like in the Cusmano household around literature and writing. It's interesting to know that you read each other's work. I think that's kind of fascinating. I can't really give my work to my dad for feedback, but obviously, you're in a different situation. So I'm curious to know, tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up.
The first thing that comes to mind is that my parents told me I wanted to be a writer. And it was true. And I think they probably just knew that before I did, because they saw me grow up and they saw me as a child. And I remember being 7 or 8 and my mom being like, there's this poetry contest, maybe you could write something and enter it. And I did. I would alternate, and I was very intentional about like alternating, like, all right, on Mondays, I'm going to play soccer during recess. And on Tuesday, I'm going to sit in my corner with my notebook and write, 8-year-old sort of rhyming couplets all in a series all together. But I remember there were always, always, always books in the house, and there was always music, and there was always film. And there was always this good balance, I think, between knowing that the writing and learning and reading that you do at school is formal and structured, and the writing and reading and learning that you do on your own by watching, classic films or listening to music or having discussions with your family or your parents is just as important. That level of informal and unstructured education is just as important. So growing up, I remember going up and down the stairs reading, which was frankly dangerous. But, and there was a point where I remember on occasion my parents, sometimes my brothers and I would have our books taken away because we were so into them. We preferred that informal and unstructured education over whatever homework we had to do for science class or math class. But I've always felt very, very supported and very, very encouraged when it comes to writing. And as I got older, to have my mom ask, you know, can you read this and can you proof it, was really, really encouraging and really validating. And, you know, one instant that stands out the most is, you know, I proofed this story that my mom read, that she had written. And I said, there's this character who's like 9, and like this kid is very verbose and a little bit obnoxious. And I don't think that like their vocabulary is appropriate or realistic. My mom was like, that 9-year-old's based on you when you were 9. And I was like, I see it. I have no further comments to make. You know, that was humbling to say the least.
Thank you, Liana. Domenic, is there other questions from people?
Yeah, we have a couple more. I guess I'll read the next couple, and then Chris, I'm not sure if you have any questions after that.
I think we could go out with the questions you have. I think that's great.
Okay, very well. So this is from an anonymous sender. He or she writes, thank you for sharing your work, or dear Liana, thank you for sharing your work with us. I am truly touched by what I heard and will carry this with me. You spoke about the bluntness of children and the elderly. Do you think there is something innocent in the bluntness of the elderly that might allow for openness to queerness? In altre parole, do you think we can find in our nonni and harness a sort of apolitical or post-political openness to gender and sexual diversity? I
think so. I think we can, because I know that there are like some actual real life grandparents out there who are like that. I don't think all of them are, but to answer the question, yes, I think that there's definitely a lot of potential there. That bluntness and that sort of I don't care what anybody thinks anymore because I'm either so young or so old. That's something that I experienced with my paternal grandfather, who passed away maybe 1.5 years ago. And I came out to him and he was like, okay, just like it was fine. It was a non-issue. It didn't matter. And so I think that it depends. It depends sometimes on something as simple as like how much Rai Italian TV do they watch? And how much media do they consume that will sort of sway them a little bit. But I think that, yes, I think that bluntness and that directness can be an opening, and it just might take a little bit more work for some grandparents than for other grandparents. But yes, I think there's a lot of, that's definitely an opening. That's definitely a foothold there.
Yeah, I've been informed that that question was from Paolo Frasca. So thank you, Paolo. And now I believe this question is from Elena Basile. You mentioned Montreal's queer spoken word scene as instrumental to your coming of age as a writer. Can you talk a bit more about the writers that might have influenced you the most? Am I wrong, or is Angela Damon in your novel a slight nod to Brossard's Angela Parkins in Le Désert Mauve?
You are totally wrong. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Elena. That's not at all where I was going with that. The poets who have inspired me the most, and at least one of them is on this call, are poets. They were among the first that I met. They're poets that I've performed with at the Canadian Festival of Spoken Word, or that I've interacted with at the Canadian Individual Poetry Slam. And so I think of members of the community like Alex Kachuk, like Rabbit Richards, like Césure, like just they're like Xander, and a lot of us just use like, you know, just one name, just those monikers. And these are people that I've worked with and that I've met, and they're my friends. And they're unique to the Montreal spoken word scene. The Montreal spoken word scene is pretty small. I don't think you'll see very, very many Montreal spoken word artists on Button Poetry or any of those like big time poetry platforms. But the thing that marked me the most when I started getting involved with the community and started working with these poets is just how open and how safe I felt as an individual. And especially when we were writing together for the Canadian Festival of Spoken Word, let's say. We're all holed up in somebody's apartment, like putting stuff down on paper and trying to negotiate openness to collaboration and a little bit of ego, because everybody's very, you know, fiercely protective of their own writing and their ideas and that particular sentence that cannot have one word struck from it ever, otherwise it's the end of the world. I think that those relationships, they were really formative for me. And the places that we performed at, like Le KGB, whether it was like further south on Saint Laurent or whether when it moved further north on Saint Laurent, the dive bar on Jean Talon, the Diving Bell, also on Saint Laurent. These people in these places, the thing that stands out the most is how safe I felt and how welcomed and supported I felt as an artist there. And that's why to not be able to go to those spaces or to share those areas with those people in person has been very strange and destabilizing as a poet and as an artist, when you're used to, okay, every month or every 2 weeks is a slam and we're all going to reconvene in this area. To not have that anymore and to try to do that over Zoom, let's say, is definitely an adjustment.
Okay, one comment and one final question before we close off. So the comment first. Oh, actually, we have two questions. One was added just now. So this is the comment, I should say. Yes, comment first. Not a question, but my appreciation for your giving voice so beautifully to queer experience. Perhaps you can add healer to your list of identities, because feeling seen and understood in your words has been medicine for me. And that was from Monica Meneghetti. And now a question. Sorry, I have a question for Liana. We both hail from St. Leonard's. Do you think there is some element particular to the queer Italian experience in the East End of Montreal, as opposed to those other cultures and places, as those of other cultures and places? Is okay.
Yes, I think so. I think part of it is that attachment to Montreal, because that's where we were born and that's where we had our first friends and that's where we first, you know, went to school and started to grow into ourselves as writers. And it's tough to negotiate that with knowing that the world is so much bigger than St. Leonard. And as a teenager and as a young adult, knowing that you wanted to leave and at least see what else was out there. And I think to negotiate that push and pull of like, this is my home, but the world is bigger than this. Or, you know, I'm out in the world and I'm having a great time, but I'm going to go back because that's where home is, that's where I'm from. And even something as simple as like the St. Leonard accent, which I will like readily admit, when I'm angry, I slip into the St. Leonard accent. And one of my like private political goals is to say the word bruh in a debate and be entirely taken seriously. So I don't know if that'll ever happen, but definitely St. Leonard has a particular feeling and mood. And I don't think you ever really leave that. And I think that you're also free to pick and choose which parts of it you're going to attach the most value to. So, you know, that one is family. You know, my family is in St. Leonard and that's why I care about it. And that's why I will always belong there on some level. All of the obnoxious Italian kids that I went to school with who think that poetry is stupid, I don't have to pay attention to them. So definitely special.
Okay, so again, one last comment and then the last question and we'll wrap it up. Darlene Madot writes, bravo, 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 Liana, you have real courage. The courage to create, the courage to speak your truth. And finally, a question, Liana, you mentioned your geographical origins and the desire to use the word bro in a political debate. So this is a political question. Does the good kid aspire to become Canada's future prime minister?
I think the good kid, that was probably the answer that the good kid gave when her parents asked her, what did you want to be? I don't know. That's a good question. That is a good question. I think the good kid does. I think the good kid does aspire to be the prime minister, but
Why?
The good kid, I'm sorry?
Why?
That's the question. When the good kid figures out exactly why, if it's something that the good kid really, really wants, or if it's something that they have internalized or that they feel has been imposed on them, whether or not that's true, then the good kid will make a decision accordingly. So I think the good kid has a lot of thinking to do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. This free event on Zoom was brought to you by the Canada Council for the Arts and the Writers Union of Canada. It is part of the Books and Biscotti literary series. We acknowledge the support of the Association of Italian Canadian Writers, the AICW. The AICW accepts donations at aicw.ca/donate. And I would also like to thank our technical host, Licia Canton, for her hard work behind the scenes. Special thanks to Chris DiRaddo for being such a wonderful host this afternoon. And to purchase Liana's chapbook, please write directly to us at accenti@accenti.ca, accenti@accenti.ca. Thank you all, and hope to see you soon at the next Books and Biscotti. And have a good Sunday, have a good week, and be safe in these difficult times of pandemic. And I hope to see you all again soon. Goodbye.
Thank you to everybody for coming. Have a great Sunday. Take care and stay safe.
Take care, guys.